A warm welcome to all of our attendees. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. The topic for today's discussion is Unveiling the Full Iceberg, How AI is Changing the Contract Analytics Game. I am Claude Murray, co-founder and president at Sirion Labs, the SaaS leader in enterprise contract management, and I will be your host for today. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items. We will be sending you the webinar slides and recording, and it will be emailed to you. And if you have questions for the panel, which we will handle at the end of the session, please enter your questions in the chat on the webinar panel, and we will try and get to as many of those as we can. So just a quick overview of the organizers of the session today. KPMG, as you all know, is a global network of independent member firms offering audit, tax, and advisory services. They operate in 147 countries and have more than 219,000 people serving the need of their business, government, public sector agencies, and nonprofits. IACCM, as I'm sure you're all familiar with, the International Association of Contract and Commercial Management, enabling organizations and professionals to achieve world-class standards in their contracting and relationship management processes and skills. And Sirion Labs is the SaaS leader in enterprise contract management, also known as CLM, helping enterprises manage the complete contracting lifecycle on a single, easy-to-use platform and enabling improved savings, business outcomes, and effective risk management. So over the next 60 minutes, what we will be covering are the following. What have we learned about contract and supplier management during COVID-19? COVID-19 actually turns out to have been a very interesting test for contract management. It has pushed it to the forefront, and all of a sudden it has the close attention of the C-suite, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Then key insights hidden in enterprise contracts and where legacy contract analytics approaches fall short in uncovering these hidden insights. And then finally, we'll talk about how AI in today's environment, AI technologies are revolutionizing contract analytics. There's been a significant movement in the industry, and we'll talk about how enterprises can integrate such technology into their CLM strategy. Okay, now let me just briefly introduce the other speakers. Toby Yu from KPMG is a managing director, and in KPMG's advisory services, specializing in helping clients reimagine their enterprise contract management strategy and drive better commercial performance through digital transformation. And Sally Geyer, who I'm sure most of you know very well, CEO of IACCM. And Sally is an experienced and accomplished commercial and contracts management professional, having held senior commercial positions at a range of corporate and multinational organizations. Sally is passionate about enabling business efficiency and growth through contracting and commercial excellence. And with that, I am actually going to hand over to Sally to do the first part of the session.
Claude, thank you very much indeed. It's wonderful to be here with you all today and very, very much looking forward to this session. As you said, Claude, the pandemic has really pushed contract and commercial management to the fore, absolutely where, of course, we believe it should be. We've watched with real interest the way in which organizations of all sizes and across all industries have responded to COVID-19. This unanticipated phenomenon inevitably resulted in extensive disruption to trading relationships and to contracts. This is, of course, very varied across industries and geographies, but there was one particular point during April of this year where almost 80% of organizations reported that they were suffering moderate to severe impacts to their contracts and trading relationships as a direct result of the pandemic. What's more, out of the 500 or so organizations surveyed, 64% reported that they didn't have any meaningful automation to support contract management. And it was interesting that this finding was really consistent across both buy-side and sell-side teams. And it didn't really seem to vary based on the size of business either. The only substantial variations were between industries, with those, for example, in business services, healthcare, and technology, significantly more likely to have systems deployed. What we also discovered that was fascinating was that those with existing automation were considerably more likely to consider their systems as business critical, whereas many of those who hadn't yet invested remained hesitant about the value that those sort of systems would ever bring to them. And for us, it was really quite remarkable that there is, in fact, anybody out there who still doesn't really perceive the potential value of technology. We'll dive into that in a little bit more detail. But finally, the most significant benefits, and this is a very important point, have been gained by those who've undertaken a holistic deployment within a consistent process. And I am going to come on to talk a little bit more about that and about why that is. So if we can move on, as I mentioned, DJ, if you could just move on to the next slide, thank you. It was fascinating to discover through all of the research that we've been undertaking since March that those with existing automation were considerably more likely to consider their systems as business critical. And if confirmatory evidence were needed, we found it from those companies who've really started to use and feel the benefit of automation. Far from dismissing its value, they were consistent in recognizing that, in fact, they needed more of it and they needed it fast. And the chart in front of you now offers that strong endorsement, the endorsement of the importance of technology. So let's move on to the next slide. One of the big issues, and the pandemic, as challenging and of course tragic as it has been, has highlighted so much and provided us with so much insight to the things that we might need to do differently. Fragmentation of data across multiple systems has proved a huge constraint for almost every organization, really limiting the benefits that their technology investment should have provided. And it's fascinating, when it comes to technology, very few organizations have adopted the same automation tools to manage both buy-side and sell-side contracts. And we're all very familiar with the internal debates. They've tended to be dominated by claims that there are fundamental differences in needs and, to an extent, in the types of contracts and terms. But the pandemic has really allowed us to challenge the validity of those positions. It's clear that the separation of systems has operated as a major barrier to information flows. Almost all organizations found it difficult and time-consuming to map the impact of events between customer contracts and supplier contracts. In fact, we know that many didn't even attempt to undertake that sort of mapping. And this has simply inhibited management reporting. And also it's limited the extent to which risks and alerts could be managed proactively. We, as an association, have long endorsed the position that organizations would do well to move towards a common buy-side, sell-side contract management system, or at least towards a common platform that would enable integration of data across those existing systems. And we are seeing some organizations do that now. So let's move on to the next slide. I think the one statistic that heartened many of the technology providers was the fact that a total of 81% of those responding to our research indicated that they either have or would develop plans to implement, replace, or add to contract automation. And when it came to functionality, we did identify a number of shortfalls, and you can see those on the screen in front of you. For some, existing systems will accommodate a few of these added requirements, but in most cases, probably in a fairly rudimentary form. For example, we know that there's limited maturity of AI-supported negotiation and very little capability to provide an integrated view across contracts in a supply chain. And indeed, the lack of supply chain visibility is another huge issue that's been uncovered by the pandemic and another area of extensive research for us right now. So how do we address these shortfalls? In some cases, organizations will need to acquire and train the necessary system. In others, they might decide to acquire a standalone tool which can be integrated into existing applications. There's also the deployment of an overarching platform, or maybe even self-development, but we don't see very much of that now. So moving on, DJ, we uncovered extensive variation in the functionality of systems deployed. Contract repositories, performance tracking tools, they're the most common features, but less than half are smart systems. And very few, I think it was around 12% from memory, have an enterprise-wide AI-enabled contract analytics. Inconsistencies of process and the inability of the system to deal with varying types of contract and internal resistance were among the reasons most often cited as inhibiting adoption of an enterprise-wide solution. And it is abundantly clear that failure to integrate with other systems and applications within the organization means that the only way to extract and reconcile data is manually, which of course massively reduces the potential benefits of automation. In summary, those with automation have, for the most part, gained some benefit from having it in place. Those who have invested in enhanced functionality have gained substantial benefit. For example, those with advanced analytic tools consistently responded that it was extremely easy to find contracts, search for terms, assess risk. These are all the things that set the leaders apart from the followers and the stragglers. Organizations that deploy the right technology have the opportunity to really address friction points and unnecessary costs incurred in the contracting process. The use of the wealth of data that's housed both in the documentation and the data that comes from the process itself can exponentially impact competitiveness and the ability to innovate and focus on continuous improvement. And we know that organizations that have adopted leading edge technology will unquestionably attract and retain the best talent. So moving on, just very briefly on this next slide, I think it really speaks for itself. The challenge that quite clearly exists with the use of emerging technology today, and particularly AI, is that it's used to address complexity. It's complexity that is incredibly frustrating, complexity that doesn't need to exist. And as such, we're really not getting the true value out of our AI systems. So DJ, let's swiftly move on to the potential that exists to use these technologies to create value. We need to eliminate the unnecessary complexity that exists with these cumbersome, convoluted and unnecessary processes and the needless complexity of language. We need contracts to pivot from legal instruments to management tools, providing our organizations with the wealth of data that they need, not just to survive through the inevitable uncertainty that is ahead of us, but to thrive, to use that data to be responsive and adapting to the changing needs and environments around us. So as I now wrap up and we'll move on to my final slide, COVID-19 has indeed been an extreme event. It has placed massive demands on systems and processes. But as I said, it's also given us a huge opportunity to see where negative friction points exist. For many, the pandemic caused them to actually bypass process. And in so doing, they realized that the process was fundamentally flawed and they needed to do things differently on a longer term basis. It really has caused them to rethink existing policy and practice. And they have discovered, very often more by luck than judgment, to be fair, a new and more efficient, more effective way of doing things. And while extreme, the pandemic points to a persistent and endemic issue associated with extracting and using contract-related data and analysis. It is, in fact, indicative of the need to improve the resilience and adaptability of organizations in this world of increasing uncertainty. The inability to provide effective management of contracts and to equip our executives with regular reports to steer decisions is a major failing that exacerbates risk and constrains business performance. And it is incumbent upon us to recognize that and to move forward. The data that you see in front of you is actually hot off the press. It's consistent with what we've been seeing over recent months. There is an absolute desire for greater collaboration, greater fairness in our approach to contracting. We have seen this over and over and over again. There's a desire and a belief, which is great. My big question remains, and one I pose to you all today: how do you plan to realize that belief and that aspiration? Most current negotiators blame others for the inability to achieve better results. It's always very easy to place the blame anywhere but ourselves. But actually, a third of those responding to this latest research recognize that their own skills are lacking. And for us, supporting our members in this space is certainly going to be a specific focus area for us over the coming months and, of course, beyond. The data also shows an acceptance that technology will become more pervasive. So, with improved 21st century negotiation skills and the right technology, who knows what we will be able to achieve? So, Toby, I'm going to hand over to you now.
Great. Thank you, Sally. Thank you, Claude. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of those attending overseas for this webinar today. I'm truly grateful for this opportunity to speak with you all and share KPMG's perspectives and experiences regarding contract management and how AI truly is a must-have for high-performing contract management functions today. So let's get started and really asking ourselves a very important question. So in our roles today as contract management professionals, whether it be in procurement, legal, sales, third-party risk, are you managing contracts, or are you supposed to be really realizing the commercial value that's contained within? I think for many of us in contract management in the profession today, the answer is that most of us are probably more focused on the administrative functions of contracting than we like to admit. Given how critical contracts are to an organization, and given how much critical data there is locked within the contracts, there is a great opportunity for us, for those of us that decide to truly make contracts a strategic asset and invest in advancing those capabilities across the enterprise. And let's face it, I think Sally put it really well. The world as we know it is changing, and contracts are very important with all the data that is contained within. And it's important for us to really think through our approach to remain relevant as a function within all of our organizations that we support. The nature of our business models and third-party relationships are continuously evolving, particularly as we move to the everything as a service economy with more complex contracting situations that are ahead of us and the volume increasing. Black swan events like COVID and other global disruptions, we need to get quick insights with better decisions for our businesses. Our expectations of technologies as employees are changing. We're in the era of user experience where simple, quick, and easy is the norm in digital everything. How do we modernize and empower our employees and business partners to better manage their business and focus less on the administrative activities associated with getting to those outcomes? So as contract management professionals, if we want to stay relevant in this new world, we need to work with our leaders to continue to help them to understand the critical nature of the contract management function to the enterprise and why investments are needed to be ready for the future. You know, no matter the industry, the size of the organization, or functional areas that you support, such as procurement, sales, or legal, it's all about managing the commercial value at the end of the day in terms of profit, costs, risks, innovation, etc. Right? So I think this is a very important time to really evaluate. So let's move forward here. So when I talk about staying relevant to our business partners, it's always good to ask ourselves how we're doing as a function, right? Many of my customers at some point in time over the past several years or 10 years or so have implemented contract management organizations, you know, including enabling CLM technologies with varying degrees of sophistication, and in many cases considered world-class, especially in terms of cost per transaction to execute a contract. Over the past several years, we've identified consistent themes based upon our voice of the customer surveys. And when I say customers, I mean internal business partners and to an extent, sometimes external customers as well. The surveys that we execute with these functions that engage in the contract management functions that support these types of activities, largely, once again, embedded in other areas such as procurement, sales, and legal and risk. But typically, a combination of all the above when we think about it from a process perspective. And as mentioned briefly before, our internal customers and users have high expectations of us, given their experiences that they have in their personal lives today, simple, quick, and easy. Just like how we rapidly click through a user agreement when downloading the TikTok app to, you know, calm our screaming kids or entertain ourselves watching them do silly dance videos with grandma. I do recognize that this recorded session may not age very well given where we're currently at in our with our president and his recent executive order. But nevertheless, typical complaints from our demanding customers: long contracting cycle times, right? I just need KPMG to start next week because the digital transformation effort is critical to my IBOs this year. Right, or cumbersome intake forms and IRQs and data requests, right? This is the fourth form that I've filled out to get the contract done. Lots of unclear questions. What is it that, you know, what do these things have to do with the contract that I need to get done? And why is this seeming to be more and more my job versus actually getting some, you know, getting the support organization to get it done? For our higher ups, many are frustrated by the fact that they can't get simple, quick answers to what seemingly is very normal, simple business questions, right? What are the penalties if we can't meet our SLAs? Do force majeure clauses cover pandemics like COVID-19? And of course, despite being the world-class, you know, function according to many maturity curves and benchmarks, many of us are finding ourselves losing relevance to the business partners that we serve. And ultimately, you know, we have to ask ourselves, what's holding us back from doing our best work? So let's move forward. So great. So I know that some of you may be thinking, easier said than done, guys, right? I mean, if only people knew. In most organizations that I've witnessed contract management, it's a bit like a duck swimming in a pond. It's calm and moving up top, but swimming below, we're working like hell below the surface to get the contract done, right? I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but it's more, you know, it's worth mentioning to acknowledge the difficulties we face as an organization or as a function, so that we can really appreciate where the automation can help. Just a couple of details here, right? Siloed functions and competing priorities stifles many contract management efforts, especially when we think about enterprise-wide Alignment is needed in order to succeed. When we take a very people-centric or a organizational-centric focus and understanding their challenges, everyone's kind of got a different aspect of what they're looking for from a contracting organization. Sales organizations are incentivized to quickly book the sale and work with customers. Procurement organizations are incentivized to get the best commercial deal and maybe not necessarily focus on cycle time as much. Risk organizations are incentivized to protect the company from the worst possible outcomes. And in order to do that, it requires time. And so ultimately, it begs the question that the organizations, are challenged with these days is ultimately who owns this end-to-end process and who should set the rules, right? And so that's a lot that's changing today as we kind of open the aperture and look at this as more of a strategic capability. Complex and disparate technologies. Us consultants often like to portray the contract management as more of a linear function or a linear process with chevrons with clear handoffs and from one function to another to successfully execute. I mean, this works great from a design perspective and helping to explain, but we all know that there's a high degree of variability given the situation. It's complex. If we design it too rigid, people don't adopt. If it's too lax, then we don't have standards, and we risk not having the data that we need in order to do the analysis. And as far as systems go, it's probably all the above, a mix of Salesforce or the Arebas, the Coupas, the ServiceNow, the EGRCs or metric streams, and then don't forget email and Word and SharePoint. So ultimately, there's got to be a better way. I often tell some of my clients this is that it's amazing how I can quickly get together with my family to organize an Airbnb road trip and get a menu negotiated with my family and agreed to, and then also tasks of who's going to bring what for the vacation, all with free online apps today, right? Between Google Docs and WhatsApp, it's amazing what we can accomplish with the tools and platforms that we have available today. And lastly, costly to govern and manage performance. This is where we get to the brass tacks. The investment required simply is higher than than any one function is typically willing to pay for, right? And so I think this goes back to kind of organizing an enterprise strategy and a business case across all of the key stakeholders that have a role in contracting. The lack of understanding of how contracts really is a strategic asset, and the lack of understanding of where technology is really changing the game and reimagining how we manage the function. So in short, the feedback is not unjustified from our internal customers, right? People have other responsibilities and other jobs as contract professionals. It's our job to help them to get their job done within the enterprise tolerance for risk and within compliance with laws and regulations, of course. And the good news for us is that finally the tools that are helping us, there are tools that are helping us to realize that vision. And today, given the topic of our webinar, I'll be spending a little bit more time discussing how one of the disruptive technologies that we've seen out there, AI, is really helping to drive that change for all of our organizations. So, moving forward. Really quickly here, so some of you may be familiar that we are in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution, and digital technology is at the center of transforming everything that we do in business. And there's a lot to consume on this slide, but I'll summarize quickly. With cloud and limitless capacity for data these days, we are truly now seeing the maturation and adoption of AI, and that will change the landscape of business as we know it. And we use the term at KPMG AI, cognitive, and intelligent automation interchangeably. Before I talk further, I wanted to share a few perspectives and maybe even dispel a few myths about AI, because I think it's important to understand as you're considering how technology can be exploited for the purposes of contract management. So let's move forward. So there are different subtypes or branches of AI that you often hear about. I'm not going to go into detail in the interest of time. There are also plenty of resources on social media, on YouTube, that and folks that are truly specialists in this area that they can give you a way better explanation. But I'll introduce some relevant ones just for the sake of this webinar, and how they're relevant for the contract management space, right? You have robotics, or RPA, which stands for robotics process automation. These are simply programs that help to perform repetitive tasks and reduce manual work, and often to improve the user experience, allowing people to focus on higher value activities. Machine learning, these are programs that take large amounts of data to identify patterns and apply these learnings to other situations, without the need for a lot of programming, if you will. Think of these as friend or product suggestions based upon your browser history or what you've clicked on within your social media apps today. Cognitive, these are more advanced capabilities that allow you to infer trends and patterns. This is where you really start to get to those advanced capabilities where, and I think in the contract management space, it'd be really great to have an intelligent assistant kind of helping you to negotiate away and help you to give you insights into contracting outcomes based on decisions that you make within your contracting clauses, for example, or your commercial terms that you're negotiating. And then finally, NLP, natural language processing. This is the ability to understand text and spoken word in much a way that human beings can, or in our world, really it's the other way around. These systems help to speak legalese and then summarize the data and put it into simple terms where we can action as folks that may not be specialists in that arena and understanding that language. But the key is all that you should know about AI is that it's here, and it will have an impact on your work, if not already, as knowledge workers. And it's not difficult to imagine that most of our personal lives are already, already influenced by some type of AI, whether it be suggestions by Amazon or by Facebook or Google Translate. These are all things that impact our daily lives today. And the key thing to note here is that based on our surveys with CEOs, is most of them believe that this is coming and this is going to change our workforce. More than half of them believe that workforce will include some type of intelligent automation to working side by side with us. 81% believe that it's something that it's in the future, right? That it's going to be important to operations. And then 61% are still concerned about integrating, and I think that has a lot to do with just organizational readiness and how is my culture going to be able to manage and adopt this successfully, right? We'll talk a little bit more about this as we move forward. So the next slide, thank you. So are the CEOs that we've interviewed putting their money where their mouths are? And the short answer is yes. The majority are investing in some type of AI, albeit in a limited capacity. But we forecast and foresee that this is going to be more and more of business as usual. This is encouraging for all of those in the profession and looking to incorporate this into our strategies moving forward. Because as it becomes more and more ubiquitous, it's going to be also easier for us to get funding for those types of things, to help to enhance our strategies. I don't have the data to back this up, but I have a hunch that CEOs are still wary about some of these investments required, as it's not something that's in their core competencies, and as a result, we see a shift to looking for third-party technology providers that already have incorporated these capabilities into their ecosystem to deliver that as an outcome for our clients. So the takeaway here is simply that it's here. There's very big demand for this coming down the pipe. There's an opportunity for contract management folks for us to be able to go and seek support from leadership to incorporate that into our strategies and ultimately to elevate our performance. So moving forward, so for those that may be a bit concerned or still curious about AI. I really don't think that there much is there to fear. I have read articles, just like I'm sure you have, suggestions that AI will displace jobs, right? I think that's true and it's happening today, but I believe that these are many of the jobs and roles that, quite frankly, people just particularly are not interested in really doing, especially when you think about, our entry-level folks coming high potential with college degrees, and when we're focusing on document management or administrative tasks, right? I think anyone would agree it'd be a poor investment from that perspective, even if we're offshoring it to best cost countries. I mean, it's just simply there's simply more things that people would like to do with their careers. And as these resources get freed up through automation, we get to focus on these more human aspects of our business, and I think that will always remain true. So instead of managing documents or clicking through systems, or shuttling data between systems, we get to really focus on negotiation strategy, evaluating risk versus reward. And instead of managing data cleansing and spend analysis, we get to work with our suppliers and develop new and innovative business models that can really improve our profit margins, right, or our revenue from that perspective. So I think these are the types of things that will continue and we'll need to encourage from a culture perspective as we move into a much more automated world, living side by side with AI. So DJ, can you move me forward? Thank you. So as I mentioned before, AI is here and it's quickly changing the nature of our workforce. And I think that it is and will be a game changer for us in the contract management profession. On the left is your traditional organization, and how we look at it is on the right is your AI-powered workforce. You'll notice that you don't see a layer where AI completely takes over, but it does change the makeup of our workforce. Instead, it empowers humans to do more faster and with less, and it empowers them to be us to be more effective in doing what, quote unquote, should be our job versus spending a lot of time managing the administrative components to get there. And I think AI will democratize the data to those that need it and allow them to run the business, and allowing us as professionals and shepherds of that process to, to elevate our purpose in working together with our business partners, customers, and organizations. Great. I mean, it sounds like motherhood and apple pie at the end of the day. But if I was giving this presentation 3 years ago or 4 years ago, I think I'd be guilty as charged. But in today's world, I'm confident that AI is here and is making an impact. And the fact that we deal with it knowingly or unknowingly within our personal lives today is a testament to the power of AI. Okay, let's spend a couple of minutes talking a bit about use cases and where we see usages of AI in contracts today, and maybe some even near-term future use cases coming down the pipe. So intelligent contract assistance, this is really about user experience and adoption. And so ultimately, AI is making it possible for us to navigate in a more self-service contracting process, right? Imagine intelligent intake forms that direct you to the right place to get the help that you need to execute the contract. Data is pre-populated based on historical transactions and those of your colleagues. Imagine intelligent intakes or assistance guiding you through the approval process to get the signature that you need based on parameters that are within the contract. Clause compliance and workflow. These are things that capabilities that allow you to keep your contracts in compliance with your risk and financial tolerances, and if not, they can automatically be directed to the right people in your organization prior to execution. As far as contract analysis goes, these are really great, for example, for due diligence for mergers and acquisitions, right? Imagine having thousands of contracts to review in a very short period of time to identify synergies needed in a merger due diligence activity. Wouldn't it be great to have an AI assistant to do all of this so that you can focus on the value engineering exercise in your future negotiation strategy, right? And those are real today. Negotiation suggestions along the way where insights can pop up to help you to make sure that you're making the best decisions to drive the right outcomes with your third parties. Commercial leakage, right? It's all about, at the end of the day, capturing that value within the contract and making sure that you actually, obtain the value that you expect from your third parties, right? And driving the right behaviors to avoid situations where you have to offer credits and whatnot, right? So I think from all that perspective, this is where there are very great AI use cases that minimize the effort, because a lot of this is integration, data, reporting, and analytics, and to drive the right behaviors. So let me move forward here. So at the end of the day, hopefully you're able to see where AI is really contributing to the performance of contract management functions today and adding value to the organization. In each of these benefit categories, we see AI playing an increasingly important role to realizing the commercial performance, right? And so in each of these benefit levers, we see AI playing a critical role in helping us to achieve these benefits, reducing total cost of ownership, increasing speed to contract, letting us focus on the relationships and driving the innovation, the quicker insights and better decisions, the commercial performance and reducing value leakage, and the collaboration that we need in order to achieve good contracts. From that perspective, AI plays an important role. So with that, I'm going to move over to my last slide here. So as I ended my presentation, I want to make sure that you provide you with a few key takeaways. So AI is finally here, and AI is a must-have for any organization looking to enhance the value of their contract management function and the value that they deliver to the organization. So I encourage you to educate yourself more about this topic and stay up to speed with its impact on your business. When evaluating contract management solutions, do test them on their AI capabilities. Bring questions that you struggle with today, and the more difficult, the better, to understand what is the art of the possible. Don't bring a list of requirements of your legacy process and expect you to get a good evaluation, because you're really looking to leapfrog with today's platforms and technologies versus rebuilding what you have in your footprint today on modern technology. And finally, remember to assess and prepare your organization for AI. And so as you're looking for this, don't forget about this is really still about people at the end of the day, and the potential changes that this has for your organization, will be transformative, and you'll need to work with people to shape the culture and maximize the value that you get out of these technologies for your contracting management function. So with that, thank you very much. Hope you were able to learn a few new things today, and I'll hand it over to Claude.
Thank you, Toby. And again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. Just a brief perspective of where I come from and how I look at this. After 25 years in the industry doing supplier and contract management, in 2012, we created Sirion Labs to help solve the problem of technology in contract management, supplier management, but also on the supply side for the customer management itself. And it's a company of about 550 people all over the globe. And today we support some of the largest companies around the world, as well as some very big government organizations. On the next slide, you can see that my view of CLM is not the traditional. CLM is so often referred to as what was the original view of CLM being contract authoring and some form of repository. Today, that is so much more. And when I talk about CLM, I mean CLM++, authoring, smart repositories, good contract analytics, including the ability to analyze the contents of the contracts, performance management, which means also compliance monitoring, automated extraction, invoice auditing, and collaboration and in that case, that means also a single source of the truth between you and your customer or you and your supplier in terms of the contract and the contract management aspects of that. So if you then stand still on the next slide and we look at, so there's so much out there that we hear about AI and auto extraction and all this stuff. How do I even start? Where do I go to even see what I have? Is that good enough, or what I'm intending to get? Is it the right thing to get? So I think we need to start with a couple of challenges in the industry. Traditionally, technology solutions in this space suffered from a couple of things. Extraction of the data from contracts has been challenging, to say the least. There was a lot of suppliers that said that, well, we can do it, but so much of it was smoke and mirrors and was done in the background, and it was done manually with a little bit of technology. The fragmentation of the IT landscape has been a big challenge. There's ERP systems, CLM systems, P2P systems. How do I get the right data from the right places in an easy way so that I can understand what's going on in my contract world, my supplier management world, my customer management world? And the manual extraction of services has been expensive. The services are expensive, time-consuming, and error-prone. And then, of course, traditional analytical solutions really took too long to set up. It took too long to train the system to do the right thing, and it was just not very practical. The good news is this has now changed. And what is out there today in the market, if we go to the next slide, please, you will see that there are now technologies that really are adding real value, is really gaining the efficiencies, really allow you to be more effective. And the best way for me to do it in a few minutes, because we can talk about this for hours, is I'm going to give you about 7 characteristics that you should look for in your AI technology, and about 19 different features that you should look for to help you guide as to whether this makes sense or not. I'm not going to talk about each of these, but use this as a checklist as you decide as to whether your existing technology is good enough or you look for other technologies out there on the market. First one is neural network-based technologies. It learns faster. It's much more effective than the traditional rule-based AI that has been on the market. So that's point number one. Number two is going beyond metadata. There's so much more that AI can do for you. Is it extracting obligations? Is it extracting for you service levels directly out of the contract? Can it handle pricing tables directly out of the contract and assist you in invoice validation, as an example? Is it scalable? You should be looking for technology that can absorb and process literally thousands of contracts at any point in time, and can do that at the right level of speed, also with the right level of accuracy. It's got to be smart. It can't just be extracting text. That's not good enough anymore. It's got to be intelligent, and it's got to do intelligent data formatting so that what is extracted is immediately usable by the machine. It's recognized, and it enables immediate analytics. It's got to be flexible. Can the user train it? Can it be used in terms of multiple sources that I get my information from? That is equally important. Is the intelligence, the reduction in lead time critically important? And can it integrate through APIs with other systems to bring information in and pass on very quickly? So then on the next few slides, I'm giving you a bit of a checklist here to look at. You know, can you simply drag and drop files from anywhere? It doesn't have to be in a specific format anymore. Has the system made it easy for you to do that? Is there a set of 100 or more predefined domestic domain-specific fields that works for you? And if it's not there, can you add them easily and simply, and can the system absorb that? Very importantly, can data be extracted from multiple document types, from images, from zip files, from email attachments, etc., to make life easy for you as the person who's going to be using it? And can it take care of things like folders and subfolders automatically without you having to worry about that? And then on the next slide, think about things like, does it extract things like standard clauses and metadata and counterparty names, all the standard things that you would expect out of a contract? Can it do all of this seamlessly? And can it help you in the classification of obligations and look so that you can look at data very quickly as soon as it's extracted, and when you ask questions of the technology, can it then go in and has already sorted and understood and sorted the contents of those contracts in a way that it can give you the answers very, very quickly. It used to be a nightmare because half the contracts we had was not searchable because it was in PDF in a format you couldn't understand it, or it was sometimes with handwriting on top of it, etc. Can the system accommodate that today? Can your new technology do multi-line, multi-column, multi-table, multi-language data extractions? We don't live in a world where it's all one language anymore. We don't live in a world where I have to go translate and put into a system manually something that sits in the spreadsheet, as an example. The system has to be able to recognize it and deal with it. Can it do text searches, for example, not only in your contract, but all the attachments to it and every other document in your repository, so you don't have to go search through all of that? Can it extract data and make corrections on individual documents or in bulk for you if you want to change something in bulk? And then, of course, auto detection and cross-referencing across contractual documents. Can it detect that? Can it understand that? On the next slide, can it send the documents around to be reviewed? Can it identify duplication and similarities and give you a warning on that? Can it assess project status and report that for you in terms of the intake of all your documents? And of course, does it keep logs? So hopefully this gives you something to work with as a checklist that you can work through and use as you do your analysis. So that in summary, what you're looking for is an AI technology that simplifies the process of extracting granular contract data, a system that converts passive document elements into measurable and actionable digital objects, and that it does self-learning with its ML engine, and that it grows smarter with every contract that it reads. So that's the kind of thing that you're looking for, something that takes data from a lot of sources, does most or all of the functions that you would typically do in your contract management, and supports a variety of different suppliers in that. So with that, I think we are going to open up for questions in the few remaining minutes. And we are going to ask DJ, any questions you have received so far that we can be answering for you?
Sure, Claude, I have a few questions. The first one is for Toby. What advice do you have for companies starting their contract management journey now?
Yeah, thanks, DJ. For us at KPMG, we always believe in the business-led approach, and I think it really starts with aligning on a right strategy with the right stakeholders, right? I think as we think about where we're at with with contract management today, I think in order to capture the return on investment and increase the value of these of the function as well as the technologies that you ultimately need to bring in to support, it really starts with building that business case and aligning across other stakeholders within your organization that have needs around contracts, right? And you may not end up with the same solutions at the end of the day, but at least a common strategy and approach of managing through the contracting management function and in a platform, if you will. Sally talked a lot about the integration and the costs associated with that and how it ultimately will influence the outcomes that you're looking for. And I think it has a lot to do with aligning with the right stakeholders across the board. So that I think that strategy is super important before you go out and start looking for solutions and building an organization.
Thank you, Toby. We'll take another one. This one is for Sally. The CLM market does not appear to be as mature as it should be. Why do you think is that?
It's maturing, which I think is a really good thing. I think the reason it's taken so long to mature is, well, frankly, contracting remains the least reformed business process in most organizations. In most organizations, the contracting life cycle isn't really understood. It's not even recognized as a holistic process. And it's fair to say that most original systems were built with a sort of retail contracting mindset, which arguably isn't even contracting at all. So massive chunks of the contracting process weren't even considered as technology providers were building their systems. So they just failed to deliver value. It's something that has frustrated IACCM for so many years, and we've really advocated for a much better focus on what the process is. And it does differ, and we've been doing a lot of work with both customers and providers to create this aligned view as to what a process is. And as I said at the beginning, it is changing now. We're definitely seeing much greater maturity now than existed just a few years ago.
Thank you, Sally. The next one, maybe Claude, you can take this one. There are many auto extraction systems on the market, and many of them have been a big disappointment. How is it any different today?
Thanks, DJ. Yes, I think that's a really great question. And I think you have to look at technology in general. Throughout, I guess the first time I got involved in technology was in the early 1980s. And there's always a consistent pattern, right? I always say that technology is a fashion business. We see what is on the runway in Milan and Paris and London and New York, but very few people actually wear that, right? Because very much of that is not really very practical by the time it appears on the runway. Technology is no different from that. We look at new technology, there's an awful lot of talk about it, but it does not mature into a practical tool for some period of time. And it's really when you start getting into that second generation of technology that you are getting to it. That is no different in terms of AI today. Only in the last, I would say, 6 months or so, have we started to see technologies on the market that really does the things that makes a difference. It is really truly fully automated. It can handle very broad types of situations. It can do things that we all wished for but couldn't see in the past. It literally took a couple of years for the technology to mature to a point where it is now practical and it can be used. You know, as an example, the speed with which it learned, the speed with which you could adjust the technology to absorb a new type of contract, as an example, took forever. Now it's almost self-adjusting, and if it needs to be adjusted, it can be done in hours and days versus over weeks and months sometimes. That's a very big difference in terms of what there was and what there is today, and it's simply the depth at which and the level of accuracy it can be done. Very, very interesting. And then, of course, speed. You know, we're looking today at the system absorbing 100,000 documents in a day, a document being defined as 50 pages, and we think that's slow. That's, of course, far more than the people around it can absorb, but that's where we are today, going to 1 million documents a day as the new challenge. So big change in terms of the technology. And I know
Claude,
we're out of time. Yep.
Yeah, sorry, I was just, we are, aren't we? I was just going to say that, and I'll say it very briefly, we just have to be so careful about garbage in, garbage out. You know, we know that contracts today are not optimal, they need to be improved, and, you know, it has to be quality over quantity.
Absolutely, absolutely. Good. And with this, want to thank everybody for attending. Please complete a brief survey at the end of the webinar and give us your feedback. Look out for the upcoming email with copies of the slides and the recording. And please join us for future events. Again, we thank you very much for attending.